Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to the channel. Today, we are embarking on an incredibly profound and extensive journey, diving deep into one of the most transformative events of the 20th century, the dramatic and utterly unexpected fall of the Berlin Wall. This wasn't merely the physical collapse of a concrete barrier. It represented the symbolic dismantling of an entire ideological divide, a moment that sent reverberations across the entire globe and fundamentally reshaped the geopolitical landscape forever. We're going to meticulously explore the intricate origins of this formidable structure, the countless lives it profoundly impacted, the desperate and often heroic attempts to overcome its oppressive presence, and the truly incredible, almost miraculous circumstances that culminated in its demise. It's a compelling narrative of human resilience, complex political maneuvering, and the unstoppable, innate yearning for freedom that resides within the human spirit. Before we immerse ourselves in this extraordinary historical account, I would genuinely love to hear from each of you. How is your day progressing so far? Please take a moment to drop a comment below and share your thoughts. And while you're there, tell me, what is one significant goal you are actively striving for in your future? Whether it's a grand ambition or a more personal aspiration, I would be truly delighted to read about your hopes and dreams. Finally, if you find this deep dive into history engaging, informative, and you appreciate the considerable effort I invest in producing these videos, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Your invaluable support genuinely helps this channel expand and enables me to continue bringing you more in-depth content just like this. Now, let us journey back in time to a world fractured by intense conflict and rigid ideology, a world where a single city became the undisputed epicenter of a global standoff. Our comprehensive story, naturally, does not commence on that momentous day of November 9th, 1989, but rather decades earlier, amidst the smoldering ruins of a continent utterly ravaged by the cataclysmic Second World War, when the relentless roar of the guns finally fell silent in May 1945. Germany lay in a state of unparalleled devastation. Its once thriving cities like Dresden, Hamburg, and Berlin reduced to vast expanses of rubble, its entire infrastructure shattered beyond recognition, and its people reeling from years of brutal, dehumanizing conflict and the profound moral stain of the Nazi regime. The Allied powers, comprising the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, who had united to defeat Nazi Germany, were then confronted with the monumental, almost insurmountable task of administering, rebuilding, and denazifying this utterly defeated nation. After much deliberation and negotiation, particularly at the Yalta Conference in February 1945 and the Potsdam Conference in July-August 1945, where the future of post-war Europe was debated and spheres of influence were tentatively outlined, they collectively decided to divide Germany into 4 distinct occupation zones. The British forces assumed control of the northwest region, encompassing vital industrial areas and major ports like Hamburg. The Americans were allocated the southwest, including Bavaria and the port of Bremen. The French were given a smaller western sliver along their border, primarily the Saarland and parts of the Rhineland. And the Soviets, predictably, occupied the entire eastern part, which crucially included the capital city of Berlin, despite its geographical location deep within the Soviet zone. This unique arrangement for Berlin, deep within Soviet-controlled territory, would become a source of perpetual friction and a flashpoint for Cold War tensions, a constant point of contention between the former allies, each vying for influence, an ideological supremacy over the remnants of the Third Reich. The city's status was a constant reminder of the unresolved issues of the war and the burgeoning East-West divide. Now, Berlin itself, despite being situated entirely within the vast Soviet occupation zone, was also subjected to this precise quadripartite division. West Berlin, therefore, became an isolated island of Western influence, a vibrant beacon of capitalist democracy and individual liberty, surrounded completely by the Soviet-controlled territory of what would soon become East Germany. This unique, inherently precarious, and deeply anomalous arrangement was an immediate recipe for escalating tension and friction from the very outset. The ideological chasm between the Western Allies, who passionately championed democratic principles, individual freedoms, and free market economies, and the Soviet Union, which staunchly advocated for communism, collective ownership, and a centrally planned economic system, quickly widened into an unbridgeable gulf. What had initially been an alliance of convenience, forged solely against a common, existential enemy, rapidly dissolved into a deep-seated mistrust, profound suspicion, and intense rivalry that would come to define the Cold War era. The Western powers envisioned a unified, democratic Germany, integrated into the Western Bloc, and a bulwark against Soviet expansion, advocating for a market economy, political pluralism, and human rights, believing this was the path to lasting peace and prosperity. Meanwhile, the Soviets aimed for a communist satellite state, firmly within their sphere of influence, promoting a one-party system, state control over all aspects of life, and the suppression of dissent, viewing their system as historically inevitable and superior. This fundamental disagreement over Germany's future was a central fault line of the emerging Cold War, manifesting most acutely in Berlin, the former capital, which became a symbolic battleground, a microcosm of the larger global struggle between two opposing worldviews. The initial spirit of post-war cooperation, fragile as it was, swiftly deteriorated. The Western powers, observing the severe economic stagnation, pervasive political repression, and growing human rights abuses within the Soviet zone, began to consolidate their respective zones. This process began with the formation of Bizonia, British and American zones, in 1947, merging their economic administrations, later joined by the French zone to form Trizonia in 1948, signaling a move towards a unified Western German entity and a departure from the four-power administration of Germany. In a decisive move, they introduced a new stable currency, the Deutschmark, in June 1948, replacing the devalued Reichsmark, which was seen as a crucial step towards economic recovery and stability for their sectors, laying the groundwork for the Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle. This currency reform, enacted without Soviet consultation, was a clear signal of Western intent to build a separate, prosperous West Germany, firmly integrated into the Western economic system and distinct from the Soviet zone. Simultaneously, they laid the foundational groundwork for the establishment of a democratic, sovereign state, signaling their intention to move towards an independent West German entity. This bold and independent action was immediately perceived by the Soviets as a direct and provocative threat, a unilateral step towards a unified, capitalist Germany that they vehemently opposed and feared, viewing it as a hostile act designed to undermine their control and influence in Eastern Europe. In a retaliatory measure, in June 1948, the Soviet Union imposed a complete and absolute blockade on all land and water access to West Berlin. Their explicit aim was to starve the Western Allies out of the city, thereby forcing them to abandon their strategic foothold and relinquish control, effectively absorbing West Berlin into the Soviet sphere and consolidating their hold on East Germany. This moment represented a critical juncture, a true test of resolve and endurance for the Western powers. Instead of contemplating withdrawal, the Western Allies launched the monumental Berlin Airlift, an unprecedented and continuous aerial operation that delivered essential food, vital fuel, and all necessary supplies to the beleaguered population of West Berlin by air for an astonishing period of nearly a year. This massive undertaking involved hundreds of thousands of meticulously planned flights, operating tirelessly day and night in all weather conditions, with planes landing every few minutes at Tempelhof, Gatow, and Tegel airports, sustaining the city's entire population and proving that the Soviet blockade was unsustainable. The sheer scale of Operation Vittles, American, or Operation Plainfare, British, was staggering, delivering over 2.3 million tons of supplies, including coal for heating, flour for bread, and medicine, demonstrating Western determination, logistical prowess, and unwavering commitment to their democratic outpost. Pilots like Gail Halvorsen, the candy bomber, who started dropping small parachutes with sweets for children, became symbols of hope and goodwill, endearing the airlift to the Berliners. The Soviets, finally realizing that their punitive blockade was utterly futile and unsustainable in the face of such resolve, eventually lifted it in May 1949, acknowledging their strategic failure and the resilience of the Western powers. This event, often seen as the first major proxy confrontation of the Cold War, solidified the ideological divide and set the stage for Germany's formal separation into two distinct states. This pivotal event irrevocably solidified the permanent division of Germany. In September 1949, the Federal Republic of Germany, universally known as West Germany, was officially established in the Western zones, with the city of Bonn designated as its provisional capital. Its constitution, the Basic Law Grundgesetz, painstakingly drafted and approved by the Western Allies, enshrined democratic principles, human rights, and a federal structure designed to prevent the rise of another totalitarian regime and ensure political stability and regional autonomy. Just 1 month later, in October 1949, the German Democratic Republic, or East Germany, was formally proclaimed in the Soviet zone, with East Berlin serving as its capital. Its political system was a one-party communist state, dominated by the Socialist Unity Party, SED, a fusion of the Communist Party and the Social Democrats, under strict Soviet guidance and control, effectively a satellite state with limited sovereignty and a command economy. The infamous Iron Curtain, a chilling term famously coined by Winston Churchill in his 1946 Fulton, Missouri speech, had truly descended across the entire European continent, from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, creating a physical and ideological barrier, and Berlin, with its starkly divided sectors, became its most poignant, visible, and enduring symbol. The two Germanys, now ideologically opposed and deeply entrenched in their respective blocs, West Germany aligning with NATO and the European Economic Community, East Germany with the Warsaw Pact and Comecon, stood as a microcosm of the global Cold War confrontation, each side representing a competing vision for humanity's future, locked in a struggle for influence, legitimacy, and global dominance, a constant ideological battle fought on multiple fronts, from propaganda to espionage. For over a decade following this formal division, despite the profound political separation and ideological chasm, movement between East and West Berlin remained surprisingly relatively unrestricted. People could freely cross between sectors using the extensive public transport network, including the S-Bahn and U-Bahn trains, which still ran across the sector borders, on foot or by private car. This seemingly open border, however, presented an increasingly severe and intractable problem for the East German authorities. West Berlin, with its thriving capitalist economy, its democratic freedoms, its vibrant cultural scene, and its ready access to an abundance of Western goods and media, acted as an irresistible, powerful magnet for East Germans who were deeply dissatisfied with their austere communist regime. The standard of living in West Germany was demonstrably and significantly higher, characterized by greater consumer choice, modern infrastructure, and abundant economic opportunities, a stark and compelling contrast to the repressive, surveillance-heavy atmosphere of the GDR, where everyday life was often drab, consumer goods were scarce, and opportunities limited by state control. West Berlin became a showcase of the West, intentionally supported by the Western Allies to highlight the benefits of their system and serve as a beacon of freedom behind the Iron Curtain, a constant reminder of what was missing in the East, and a source of discontent and unrest for the East German populace, undermining the legitimacy of the socialist state. Thousands upon thousands of East Germans, particularly highly skilled workers, educated professionals, and influential intellectuals, began to flee to the West in a continuous stream, often referred to as voting with their feet. This constant and accelerating exodus, frequently referred to as the brain drain or Republik Flecht, flight from the Republic, was systematically bleeding East Germany dry of its most vital human resources and intellectual capital. Doctors, engineers, teachers, scientists, and young, ambitious individuals sought better prospects, greater personal freedoms, and an escape from political repression and economic stagnation. Between 1949 and 1961, an estimated 2.7 million people, representing nearly 1/6 of East Germany's entire population, had defected. This was an utterly unsustainable situation for the GDR, directly threatening its economic viability, its political stability, and its very existence. The loss of such a significant portion of its workforce, especially its most skilled and educated citizens, crippled its industrial capacity, agricultural output, and future development, leading to chronic labor shortages and a severe demographic imbalance that jeopardized its socialist planning and its very claim to be successful workers. State. The East German leadership, under the autocratic rule of Walter Ulbricht, the first secretary of the Socialist Unity Party, desperately sought a definitive solution to halt this catastrophic hemorrhage of its population. They repeatedly appealed to Moscow for explicit permission to permanently seal the border, but the cautious Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev initially hesitated, fearing that such a provocative and aggressive move could dangerously escalate already heightened Cold War tensions into a full-blown military confrontation. He was particularly wary of a direct confrontation with the Western powers in Berlin, a city still under four-power control and a symbol of Allied rights, which could trigger a wider conflict, potentially even nuclear war. Given the heightened global tensions of the early 1960s, a period marked by the Cuban Missile Crisis and other flashpoints, however, the relentless and accelerating defection rate, coupled with increasing and persistent pressure from Ulbricht, and the growing perception that the West was actively exploiting this open border for espionage, sabotage, and propaganda, eventually swayed Khrushchev's cautious stance. The GDR was on the verge of economic collapse due to the loss of its most productive workforce, a crisis that could destabilize the entire Eastern Bloc and undermine Soviet prestige and the credibility of the socialist system globally. The momentous decision to erect a physical barrier was made in the utmost secrecy, shrouded in a veil of deception, following a crucial meeting of Warsaw Pact leaders in Moscow in early August 1961, where the plan was approved and coordinated with military precision. The meticulously planned objective was to construct a formidable barrier that would physically separate East and West Berlin, thereby effectively trapping the remaining population within the confines of the GDR. The world was about to bear witness to the rapid construction of a monumental testament to division, a tangible physical manifestation of the Cold War's entrenched ideological battle lines, a symbol of a regime's desperation to survive and its willingness to imprison its own people to prevent their escape, a stark admission of its failure to retain its citizens by consent, and a profound violation of human rights on a massive scale. Night of August 12, 1961, was a Saturday. Most Berliners were enjoying their weekend, completely unaware of the momentous, life-altering events that were about to dramatically unfold. In the very early hours of August 13th, under the impenetrable cloak of darkness, and with military precision, East German police and army units, numbering in the tens of thousands, along with members of the Kampfgruppen der Arbeiterklasse, combat. Groups of the working class, a paramilitary force of party loyalists, began their operation to systematically seal off the entire border to West Berlin. They commenced by tearing up streets, laying down vast stretches of barbed wire fences, and erecting temporary, makeshift barriers. Public transport lines that had previously connected east and west were abruptly and permanently severed. There, tracks ripped up or blocked, disrupting vital city infrastructure and daily routines for millions. Within a matter of mere hours, the vibrant, interconnected city was literally and brutally cut in two. Families were separated overnight, some finding themselves trapped on one side of the newly erected barrier, while their beloved ones were stranded. On the other, people who commuted daily for work suddenly found their established routes blocked, their essential jobs in West Berlin rendered unreachable, their lives instantly upended, and their futures uncertain. The shock, disbelief, and profound sense of betrayal were immense and instantaneous. The eerie silence of the dawn was broken only by the sounds of construction, the distant barking of dogs, and the cries of bewildered citizens realizing their fate, a chilling dawn for millions who awoke to find their city transformed into a divided prison, a new reality imposed by force, without warning or consent, isolating them from friends, family, and the outside world. Initially, the barrier was a crude and rudimentary affair, consisting primarily of tangled barbed wire and hastily constructed fences, often reinforced with concrete posts and wooden planks. But over the ensuing days, weeks, and months, it rapidly evolved into an increasingly sophisticated, formidable, and deadly concrete wall. Houses that stood directly on the newly established borderline were summarily evacuated, their windows ominously bricked up, transforming them into part of the barrier itself, creating a desolate no-man's land. Streets were dug up, and vital railway lines were systematically torn apart, ensuring no easy passage and reinforcing the permanence of the division. Even sewage systems and underground tunnels were sealed, and buildings adjacent to the wall were often demolished to create a clear line of sight for border guards, forming a wide, unobstructed death strip designed to expose anyone attempting to cross. The construction was relentless, transforming the city's physical landscape and the lives of its millions of inhabitants with terrifying speed and permanence. The East German government officially, and ironically, dubbed it the anti-fascist protective barrier, disingenuously claiming it was absolutely necessary to protect their socialist state from alleged Western aggression, espionage, and infiltration, a narrative consistently pushed through state media and educational institutions to justify the imprisonment of its own people. In stark reality, it was a desperate, draconian measure designed solely to prevent its own citizens from escaping the suffocating confines of their communist state, a prison wall built to keep people in, not to keep invaders out, a monumental symbol of state failure and human rights abuse, a physical manifestation of the Iron Curtain's harsh reality, the immediate human. Impact was devastating beyond measure. Thousands of families were irrevocably torn apart, rendered unable to visit or even communicate with relatives living just a few hundred meters away. Children were abruptly separated from their parents and spouses from their partners, creating an enduring legacy of heartbreak and longing that would last for decades. People who had commuted daily for work suddenly found themselves unemployed, their livelihoods destroyed overnight, facing an uncertain future within a closed society. The psychological toll on the population was immense. A once vibrant, interconnected city had been brutally cleaved in two, creating two distinct worlds with vastly different realities, opportunities, and freedoms. The wall became the ultimate, tangible symbol of oppression, a stark and constant reminder of the absolute lack of freedom. choice, and mobility in the east. The initial shock gave way to a deep, pervasive sense of loss, confinement, and a chilling realization of the regime's absolute, unyielding power over their lives. A feeling of being trapped, with no recourse or escape, leading to widespread despair and quiet resistance as people grappled with their new, confined existence and the profound injustice of their situation. Life with the wall was a constant, pervasive and profoundly oppressive reality for East Berliners. The barrier itself was not merely a single wall, but rather a complex, multi-layered system of interconnected obstacles meticulously designed to be virtually impenetrable. It grew more formidable and deadly with each passing year, evolving into what was known as the Hinterland Mauer, inner wall, on the East German side, followed by the Todesstreifen, death strip, a cleared zone approximately 100 to 150 meters wide, and finally, the Vorderland Mauer, outer wall facing West Berlin. The initial barbed wire was swiftly replaced by imposing concrete slabs, reaching towering heights of up to 3.6 meters, approximately 12 feet, often topped with a smooth, rounded pipe to prevent easy climbing. Behind this imposing main wall, on the East German side, lay a heavily guarded and utterly desolate death strip. This was a wide expanse of land, meticulously cleared of all buildings, vegetation, and debris, often covered with finely raked sand or gravel to reveal any footprints, making it virtually impossible for anyone to cross undetected. Within this lethal strip were strategically placed anti-vehicle trenches to stop cars or trucks, rows of razor-sharp spikes, known as Stalin's lawns, and intricate tripwires connected to piercing alarms, and in some sections, even automatic firing systems, though these were less widespread than often believed. Dog runs with aggressive guard dogs patrolled certain sections, adding another layer of terror for potential escapees, creating a truly formidable obstacle course designed for death and deterrence, a grim testament to human ingenuity applied to repression. Watchtowers, equipped with powerful searchlights and manned by heavily armed border guards from the Grenztruppen der DDR, border troops of the GDR, dotted the entire length of the wall, providing an unobstructed, panoramic view of the death strip. These guards operated under strict orders to shoot anyone attempting to cross, known as the Schiebefehl, order to shoot, a policy that resulted in numerous fatalities and instilled fear in both the population and, often, the guards themselves, who faced severe penalties for failing to comply or for displaying leniency, creating a moral dilemma for many young conscripts. Over the wall's 28-year existence, estimates vary, but at least 140 people were killed while attempting to escape across the Berlin Wall, with countless more injured, captured, or imprisoned in harsh conditions. Among the most tragic cases was Peter Fechter, a young bricklayer shot and left to bleed to death in the death strip in 1962, his cries for help ignored by both East and West for hours, a chilling testament to the brutality and inhumanity of the regime and the paralysis of the Cold War. His death sparked outrage in West Berlin and international condemnation, becoming a symbol of the wall's cruelty. Another was Chris Geffroy, the last person to be shot and killed while attempting to escape in February 1989, just months before the wall fell, highlighting the regime's continued ruthlessness even as its end approached, a final tragic victim of a dying system's desperate grasp, a stark reminder of the human cost of the division and the regime's unwavering commitment to its oppressive policies until the very end. The wall was a chilling physical manifestation of the state's absolute, iron-fisted control over its citizens' lives, a constant, looming presence, a daily, inescapable reminder of their profound confinement and the ever-present threat of violence. And death beyond the stark physical barrier, the wall represented an even more profound psychological barrier. It fostered a pervasive atmosphere of fear, deep suspicion, and relentless surveillance. The Stasi, East Germany's notorious and omnipresent secret police, officially known as the Ministry for State Security, MFS, played a crucial, insidious role in maintaining this suffocating control. They infiltrated every conceivable aspect of society, recruiting hundreds of thousands of informants from all walks of life, neighbors, friends, colleagues, even family members, meticulously monitoring conversations, intercepting and opening private mail, tapping telephone lines, and generally instilling a deep and corrosive sense of mistrust among the entire population. Their psychological warfare tactics, known as Zersitzung, decomposition, aimed to undermine and destroy individuals and groups deemed subversive, often without overt violence, but through systematic psychological torment, social isolation, professional ruin, and character assassination, making it impossible for dissidents to live normal lives or organize effectively. People learned to be incredibly careful about what they said, even in the privacy of their own homes, fearing that a casual, innocent remark could lead to severe consequences, including imprisonment in their infamous facilities like Hohenschönhausen, a former Soviet prison turned Stasi detention center, where political prisoners were subjected to psychological torture and deprivation, designed to break their will. The Stasi's methods were sophisticated, psychologically manipulative, and often brutally effective, designed to crush any form of dissent, independent thought, or collective action, creating a climate of pervasive anxiety and self-censorship that permeated every aspect of life, from public spaces to private thoughts, leaving no room for genuine freedom or spontaneous expression, and effectively isolating individuals from each other. Despite the immense risks, the indomitable human spirit's yearning for fundamental freedom proved to be incredibly resilient and persistent. Throughout the wall's 28-year existence, countless individuals attempted to cross it, employing astonishing ingenuity, audacious bravery, and often sheer desperation. Some dug incredibly elaborate tunnels, often starting from the basements of buildings on the East German side, extending hundreds of meters beneath the treacherous death strip and miraculously emerging in West Berlin. These were incredibly dangerous, claustrophobic, and physically demanding endeavors, often prone to collapse, flooding, or sudden discovery by Stasi informants or sophisticated listening devices. One particularly famous tunnel, meticulously dug by a group of determined students, allowed 57 people to escape to freedom in 1964, a testament to their courage and meticulous planning, known as Tunnel 57. Another, Tunnel 29, facilitated the escape of 29 people in 1962, highlighting the collective effort involved in many successful escapes, and the dedication of Fluchthelfer, escape helpers from the West, who risked their own lives and faced imprisonment to aid others in their quest for liberty, often for humanitarian reasons, forming a crucial network of resistance. Others attempted to swim across the cold, murky waters of the Spree River or the Teltow Canal, which formed significant parts of the heavily guarded border. This was incredibly perilous, as the waters were constantly patrolled by East German boats equipped with searchlights and armed guards, and the banks were heavily guarded by armed soldiers, often with submerged barriers, nets, and even mines, to entangle swimmers. Some even tried to construct makeshift hot air balloons, hoping to float silently over the formidable barrier, a truly audacious method that required immense courage and technical skill, often learned through trial and error, sometimes with tragic consequences. One extraordinary family, the Wetzel and Strelzik families, famously built a large, crude balloon out of scraps of material and successfully flew over the wall in 1979, a truly remarkable feat of courage, engineering, and sheer determination. That captured global attention and inspired a popular film, Night Crossing. There were also daring attempts to crash through heavily fortified checkpoints in reinforced vehicles, to slide along zip lines from buildings, or to simply run across open sections of the wall in fleeting moments of perceived opportunity, dodging bullets and alarms, each a desperate gamble for liberty. Against overwhelming odds, each escape attempt, whether ultimately successful or tragically fatal, became a whispered story among East Germans, fueling both fragile hope and profound despair, inspiring others while serving as a grim warning of the severe penalties for failure and the ever-present danger of the regime's brutal response. Checkpoint Charlie, strategically located on Friedrichstraße, became the most iconic and internationally recognized crossing point between East and West Berlin. It was primarily used by Allied military personnel, foreign tourists, and diplomats, making it a crucial diplomatic flashpoint and a symbol of Cold War tensions. This was the undisputed front line of the Cold War, a place of intense tension, high stakes, and dramatic standoffs. In October 1961, just months after the wall's initial construction, American and Soviet tanks faced each other at Checkpoint Charlie for a terrifying 16 hours, their gun barrels positioned just meters apart in a chilling confrontation over Allied access rights to East Berlin, a moment that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The entire world held its breath, fearing that a single misstep or miscalculation could trigger a full-scale, catastrophic conflict. Checkpoint Charlie also became a notorious site for clandestine spy exchanges, serving as the dramatic backdrop for countless espionage thrillers and films, embodying the secretive, high-stakes nature of the Cold War and its shadowy operations, a place where East met West in a dangerous, often deadly, dance of ideologies and intelligence agencies, a constant reminder of the precarious global balance. From the Western perspective, the Berlin Wall was unequivocally a monstrous symbol of communist oppression, a stark and undeniable reminder of the brutal division of Germany, and by extension, the entire European continent. Western leaders frequently made highly publicized visits to West Berlin to demonstrate unwavering solidarity with its beleaguered citizens and to publicly condemn the wall's existence. In June 1963, President John F. Kennedy delivered his now legendary Ich bin ein Berliner speech to a massive, adoring crowd of West Berliners gathered in front of the Schneeberg Rathaus, declaring his profound empathy with the people of West Berlin and unequivocally affirming America's steadfast commitment to their freedom and security. His powerful words resonated globally, serving as a potent message of defiance against totalitarianism and a beacon of hope for those trapped behind the Iron Curtain, a clear statement that the West would not abandon them to their fate. More than 2 decades later, in June 1987, President Ronald Reagan stood at the historic Brandenburg Gate, just meters from the imposing wall, and issued his legendary direct challenge. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. This direct, impassioned appeal to the Soviet leader, delivered with unwavering conviction, powerfully encapsulated the Western world's deep desire for an end to the division and a return to fundamental freedom for all Germans. These speeches were not merely rhetorical flourishes. They were profound moral statements, reinforcing the West's unwavering position and offering tangible hope to those living under the shadow of the wall, demonstrating that the world had not forgotten them and was actively working for their liberation and the triumph of human rights, keeping the dream of freedom alive. For the East German regime, the wall was relentlessly portrayed through pervasive state propaganda as an anti-fascist protective barrier, ostensibly defending the GDR from the alleged infiltration of Western spies, saboteurs, and the corrupting influence of capitalist decadence. This distorted narrative was constantly reinforced through state-controlled media, the education system, and all forms of public discourse, from kindergarten to university, shaping public perception and attempting to justify the repressive measures. Any dissent, questioning, or deviation from this official party line was met with severe and swift repression, often leading to imprisonment, loss of employment, or social ostracization, creating a climate of fear and conformity. The government sought to create a homogeneous, obedient society, utterly loyal to the party and the socialist ideal, and the wall was presented as an absolutely necessary measure to achieve this utopian vision, a shield against external threats. And internal subversion, a necessary evil for the greater good of socialism, protecting its citizens from Western fascism and moral decay. However, beneath the surface of official pronouncements and forced smiles, a deep sense of resentment, frustration, and disillusionment simmered among the vast majority of the population. The stark and undeniable contrast between the visible prosperity, vibrant culture, and personal freedoms of West Berlin, clearly visible just beyond the concrete, and the drab, restrictive realities of daily life in the GDR, was simply impossible. To ignore or suppress, fueled by Western television broadcasts that penetrated the Iron Curtain and provided a window to another world of consumer, abundance, and freedom, undermining the official narrative and revealing the truth of their situation, fostering a desire for change. Economically, East Germany operated under a rigid, centrally planned command economy. Typical of all Soviet bloc nations, the state exercised absolute control over all means of production, distribution, and pricing, leaving no room for private enterprise or genuine market forces, stifling innovation and efficiency. While the GDR initially boasted one of the highest living standards within the Eastern Bloc, it lagged significantly and increasingly behind the dynamic, innovative economy of West Germany, particularly in consumer goods and technology, leading to a widening gap in quality of life and consumer satisfaction. Chronic shortages of essential consumer goods were a common occurrence. Long queues for basic necessities were a daily ritual, and the quality of domestically produced items was often notoriously poor, leading to a thriving black market and a culture of improvisation and makeshift solutions, where citizens bartered and traded for desired goods, often relying on buckware, stoopware, goods kept under the counter. Innovation was stifled by bureaucratic inertia, a lack of competition, and an emphasis on heavy industry over consumer goods, and the economy struggled immensely to compete with the dynamic, market-driven West, leading to a growing technological gap and increasing foreign debt, particularly as it tried to maintain its military and security apparatus and subsidize its failing industries, creating an unsustainable financial burden that eventually led to its economic collapse. This widening economic disparity was a constant source of frustration and resentment for East Germans, who could clearly see the abundance, variety, and superior quality of goods available in the West through television broadcasts and during visits from Western relatives. The grand promise of a socialist paradise simply failed to materialize in the daily, mundane lives of ordinary citizens, leading to widespread cynicism and a deep desire for change, as they compared their drab reality to the vibrant images from the West. Culturally, the wall created two distinctly separate German identities, diverging significantly over the decades. In the West, Berlin became a powerful symbol of resilience, a vibrant cultural hub, and a magnet for artists, musicians, and intellectuals drawn to its unique atmosphere of freedom, creativity, and defiance. Art, music, and literature frequently reflected the profound division, exploring poignant themes of separation, longing, absurdity, and the human cost of the wall. Iconic musicians like David Bowie, who lived in West Berlin and recorded albums there, finding inspiration in the city's unique energy, and U2, who famously performed near the wall, found inspiration in the divided city, creating works that reflected its unique tension and hope. The city's counterculture thrived, embracing its unique status as an island of freedom, attracting a diverse array of creative individuals, and becoming a haven for alternative lifestyles, particularly in its Kreuzberg district, known for its vibrant arts scene. In the East, cultural expression was tightly controlled and heavily censored by the state. Art, literature, and music were explicitly expected to conform to the principles of socialist realism and actively promote party ideology, often leading to bland and uninspired works that lacked genuine artistic merit and public appeal, designed to reinforce state narratives and stifle independent thought. While there were certainly talented artists and musicians in the GDR, their work often had to navigate the strictures of censorship and seek state approval, leading to self-censorship or subtle forms of artistic rebellion, often expressed through allegories or double meanings understood by the discerning public. Despite these limitations, subtle forms of protest and alternative cultural movements did emerge, often underground, within church groups, or through samizdat publications, reflecting the deep yearning for greater freedom of expression and individuality, creating a quiet but persistent resistance that challenged the state's cultural monopoly and its attempts at thought control, laying the groundwork for a cultural awakening. The wall, in its oppressive, omnipresent reality, inadvertently fueled a unique and distinct cultural landscape on both sides, profoundly shaped by its very existence and the ideological divide it represented. The seeds of the wall's eventual, dramatic demise were sown far away, within the heart of the Soviet Union itself, with the transformative rise of Mikhail Gorbachev to power in 1985. Gorbachev, a pragmatic and forward-thinking leader, recognized that the Soviet Union's rigid, centrally planned economy was stagnating dangerously, unable to meet the needs of its people, and that its international standing was rapidly eroding due to the costly arms race with the West and the draining, unpopular war in Afghanistan. He courageously introduced two revolutionary and interconnected policies: glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. Glasnost aimed to increase transparency in government, allow for greater freedom of expression, and even permit limited public criticism of the Soviet system, a radical departure from previous repression, leading to a more open public discourse and a re-examination of Soviet history and its past mistakes, including the legacy of Stalinism. Perestroika sought to fundamentally reform the Soviet economy by introducing elements of market-based principles, decentralization, and greater efficiency, attempting to salvage the failing system and improve living standards for ordinary citizens. Acknowledging the need for change and innovation to compete globally. These ambitious reforms, while explicitly intended to revitalize and strengthen the Soviet system, inadvertently unleashed powerful forces that would ultimately lead to its irreversible collapse and the dramatic unraveling of the entire Eastern Bloc as citizens gained a voice and saw the system's inherent flaws and corruption laid bare, leading to demands for even greater change and ultimately self-determination and national sovereignty beyond what Gorbachev initially intended or could control. Gorbachev's new, more conciliatory approach signaled a significant and profound shift in Soviet foreign policy. He made it increasingly clear, through both words and actions, that the Soviet Union would no longer intervene militarily to prop up failing communist regimes in Eastern Europe, effectively abandoning the long-standing Brezhnev doctrine, which had previously justified Soviet military intervention to preserve socialism, as seen in Czechoslovakia in 1968 and Hungary in 1956. This groundbreaking message, sometimes referred to as the Sinatra Doctrine, allowing Eastern Bloc states to do it their way, delivered subtly at first, then more explicitly, sent shockwaves of apprehension and hope through the satellite states. For decades, these communist regimes had relied heavily on Soviet military backing to suppress internal dissent, maintain their iron grip on power, and prevent popular uprisings. Now, they were largely on their own, facing their increasingly restless populations without the ultimate guarantee of Soviet tanks. A terrifying prospect for the hardliners who had built their power on Soviet support and control, leaving them exposed and vulnerable to popular will and internal pressures, accelerating the process of reform or collapse. The profound impact of Gorbachev's reforms quickly reverberated across the entire Eastern European landscape. Hungary, a relatively more liberal communist state compared to the GDR, began the symbolic and practical dismantling of its section of the Iron Curtain along its border with Austria in May 1989, a move that created the first major breach in the seemingly impenetrable barrier. This seemingly small act had enormous and unforeseen consequences. It inadvertently created a crucial loophole, a tangible pathway to freedom for East Germans. Thousands of East Germans, seeing this unprecedented opportunity, began to travel to Hungary, ostensibly for holidays, but with the true, desperate intention of crossing into Austria and then continuing their journey to West Germany. This exodus accelerated dramatically throughout the summer of 1989, transforming into an unstoppable flood of refugees, overwhelming border controls and diplomatic missions, creating makeshift refugee camps in Budapest and Prague, and causing a severe diplomatic crisis for the GDR, which was powerless to stop it and faced international condemnation for its repressive policies and its inability to control its own population, leading to a humanitarian crisis that further exposed its weaknesses. Other Eastern Bloc countries, like Czechoslovakia and Poland, also became critical transit points for East Germans desperately seeking to escape. West German embassies in Prague and Warsaw were utterly overwhelmed with thousands of East Germans seeking political asylum and safe passage to the West, living in squalid conditions in embassy gardens and on embassy grounds, drawing international media attention to their plight and the humanitarian crisis unfolding. The poignant images of thousands of East Germans camping outside these embassies, patiently and desperately waiting for freedom, were broadcast worldwide, vividly highlighting the deep dissatisfaction, widespread discontent, and profound yearning for liberty within the GDR. This mass emigration was an unmitigated public relations disaster for the East German government, publicly exposing the blatant lie that its citizens were content, prosperous, and loyal, revealing the deep cracks in the regime's facade for all the world to see and undermining its legitimacy on the international stage, demonstrating its fundamental failure to provide a desirable life for its people. Within East Germany itself, the mood was growing increasingly restless, defiant, and volatile. Inspired by the dramatic changes in other Eastern Bloc countries and the clear, undeniable signs of Soviet non-intervention, a powerful grassroots protest movement began to gain unstoppable momentum. The now famous Monday demonstrations in Leipzig, which initially began with a few hundred brave people gathering for quiet prayers for peace at St. Nicholas Church, quickly swelled into massive weekly protests involving tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of people. Their initial demands were for basic travel rights and greater personal freedoms, but they soon escalated to powerful calls for genuine democracy, free and fair elections, and the immediate end of the Communist Party's suffocating monopoly on power. These demonstrations were remarkably peaceful, but incredibly powerful, challenging the authority of the state in an unprecedented and undeniable way, with participants chanting, "Wir sind das Volk," "We are the people," and "No violence," as they marched through the streets, facing down armed police and security forces with courage and determination, refusing to be intimidated and demanding their fundamental rights, pushing the regime to the brink of collapse and forcing a confrontation. Erich Honecker, the long-serving, hardline leader of East Germany, remained stubbornly resistant to any form of meaningful reform. He clung rigidly to the old, discredited hardline communist ideology, dismissing Gorbachev's reforms as dangerous, unnecessary, and a betrayal of socialist principles. He famously and foolishly declared that the wall would stand for another 50 or 100 years, demonstrating his utter detachment from reality and the growing popular discontent that was boiling over on the streets. His regime continued to crack down on dissent with brutal force, but the sheer scale of the protests and the growing international pressure made his position increasingly untenable and unsustainable. The internal and external pressures were mounting, inexorably creating an impossible situation for the intransigent GDR leadership, who were losing control of the streets, the narrative, and ultimately their power, unable to adapt to the rapidly changing political climate and the demands of their own citizens, leading to an internal party coup orchestrated by those who saw the writing on the wall and sought to save the party, if not the state. The 40th anniversary of the German Democratic Republic on October 7, 1989, was intended to be a grand, triumphant celebration of socialist achievement and stability, a show of strength and unity to the world, despite the internal turmoil and mass exodus. Instead, it became a poignant and ironic symbol of the regime's profound isolation, its growing internal weakness, and its impending, inevitable collapse. Mikhail Gorbachev himself attended the celebrations, and during his visit, he subtly but unmistakably warned Honecker that the GDR desperately needed to adapt to the changing times or face dire consequences. He famously told Honecker, in a moment that would become legendary, "Life punishes those who come too late," a clear warning that those who resisted reform would be left behind by history and face severe repercussions, a direct challenge to Honecker's hardline stance. This was a clear and unmistakable signal that Soviet support was no longer unconditional, and that the East German leadership could no longer rely on Moscow to bail them out of their self-inflicted crisis. The message was not lost on the East German people, who interpreted it as a powerful sign that fundamental change was indeed possible and perhaps even imminent, emboldening their protests and increasing their demands for freedom and self-determination. Sensing the regime's vulnerability and the shifting geopolitical winds, just days after Gorbachev's ominous visit, on October 18, 1989, Erich Honecker was finally forced to resign, ostensibly due to ill health, but in stark reality, he was unceremoniously ousted by his own Politburo, who had finally realized that his stubborn intransigence was inexorably leading the country to utter ruin and potential civil unrest. He was replaced by Egon Krenz, a younger, seemingly more reform-minded leader who attempted to present a more modern image and promised a wind or turning point, a new direction for the GDR, acknowledging the need for some change to appease the populace. Krenz immediately attempted to appease the growing protest movement by vaguely promising reforms and dialogue, but his past association with the hardline regime and his lack of genuine commitment to radical change meant he utterly lacked credibility with the increasingly vocal and demanding public. The momentum for profound change was simply too strong, and the people demanded far more than just cosmetic adjustments or empty promises. They demanded real freedom and democracy, and nothing less, making Krenz's position untenable from the start, and his efforts futile in the face of widespread discontent and a collapsing system as events spiraled beyond his control. The pressure continued to build relentlessly. On November 4, 1989, over 500,000 people gathered in East Berlin's historic Alexanderplatz for the largest unauthorized demonstration in East German history. Speakers openly and courageously criticized the government, demanding fundamental freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and crucially, freedom of travel. The sheer, unprecedented scale of this protest unequivocally demonstrated that the regime had completely lost control of its own people and their collective will. The government, desperate to regain some semblance of authority and to stem the overwhelming tide of emigration, which continued through Czechoslovakia, decided to draft a new, ostensibly more liberal travel law. The explicit aim was to allow East Germans to travel abroad more freely, hoping this carefully controlled concession would pacify the population and encourage them to remain within the GDR. This new law was intended to be meticulously controlled, requiring formal applications, potentially involving lengthy waiting periods, and restricting destinations, certainly not allowing immediate, unrestricted travel to the West. However, a crucial and utterly unforeseen miscommunication was about to transform this carefully planned, limited concession into an uncontrollable, irreversible catalyst for the wall's dramatic and sudden fall. The evening of November 9th, 1989, began like many other evenings in East Berlin, with thousands of people gathered for the ongoing Monday demonstrations, their voices echoing through the cold streets, demanding freedom and fundamental change. But this particular evening was about to become indelibly etched into the annals of history, a moment of profound global significance. At precisely 6 p.m., Gunter Schabowski, a relatively new and somewhat unprepared member of the Politburo and the party's official spokesman, began what was supposed to be a routine, uneventful press conference. He had been hastily handed a handwritten note just moments before the conference, containing the vague details of the new proposed travel regulations. These regulations were, as mentioned, intended to be a carefully managed, gradual easing of travel restrictions requiring formal applications and potentially involving waiting periods, not an immediate opening. The plan was to allow travel only with a passport and visa, which would still be subject to approval, and the law was not supposed to take effect until the next day, November 10th, giving border guards time to be briefed and implement the new controlled procedures. Schabowski, however, had not been fully briefed on the precise details, the nuances, or the intended implementation timeline of the new rules. He was tired and disoriented from a long day of meetings, having just returned from a party conference, and had not even read the full text of the new regulations, only a summary. Towards the very end of the lengthy press conference, a persistent journalist, Riccardo Ehrman of the Italian news agency ANSA, asked a seemingly innocuous question about the new travel law. Schabowski, fumbling nervously through his papers, read aloud from the note, stating that East German citizens would be allowed to apply for travel abroad without needing to meet previous stringent conditions for travel. He then added almost, as a casual afterthought, his voice lacking any sense of urgency or gravity, "Therefore, we have decided today to implement a regulation that makes it possible for every citizen of the German Democratic Republic to leave the country via any of the border crossings." Then came the truly fateful, pivotal question from another journalist, Peter Brinkmann of the influential German tabloid Bild newspaper, who pressed for clarity. "When does this come into effect?" Schabowski paused, looked down at his notes, clearly searching for information he didn't possess, his face showing a moment of confusion and uncertainty, and then, seemingly improvising on the spot, uttered the immortal words that would irrevocably change everything. "As far as I know, it takes effect immediately, without delay." He then added, further cementing the misunderstanding, the decision was made to open the border crossings for private travel. He even gestured with his hands, as if to emphasize the immediacy, completely unaware of the seismic impact his words would have on millions and on world history, effectively signing the death warrant of the GDR and ending decades of division. With a single unplanned and erroneous statement that reverberated globally. This stunning statement, delivered live on East German television and simultaneously picked up by international news wires, was a monumental, utterly unforeseen blunder. The new regulations were actually meant to be announced the following day, November 10th, and crucially, border guards were supposed to receive detailed instructions on how to process the new, controlled applications, which were still intended to be restrictive and not allow free passage. Shabovsky's misstatement, his glaring lack of precise information, and his casual, almost indifferent delivery of such a profoundly revolutionary change created instant, widespread confusion, disbelief, and ultimately, an unstoppable wave of popular action. The news spread like wildfire, igniting hope and determination across East Berlin and beyond, reaching every corner of the city through radio and television, compelling people to act on what they believed was a true, immediate opening, an unprecedented opportunity for freedom. Within minutes, news agencies around the world flashed sensational headlines. East Germany opens borders, and Berlin Wall falls. West German television and radio stations, which were widely watched and listened to by millions in East Berlin, immediately picked up on the story, broadcasting the news with immense excitement and breathless anticipation, urging people to go to the wall and witness history in the making. The information spread like wildfire through East Berlin and beyond, primarily by word of mouth, through frantic telephone calls, and crucially, through the ubiquitous West German media, which many East Germans secretly consumed, often tuning. And despite official prohibitions, eager for uncensored news and a glimpse of the outside world that had been denied to them for so long, at the various border crossings in Berlin, the situation rapidly descended into utter chaos. Border guards, who had received absolutely no official instructions about any immediate changes to their standing orders, were utterly bewildered and panicked. They saw the news reports flashing on television screens in their guard posts, heard the growing roar of thousands of people gathering outside, but had no explicit orders to open the gates. They were still operating under the strict, long-standing shoot-to-kill orders for anyone attempting to cross illegally, a terrifying contradiction that left them in an impossible position, caught between conflicting directives and a surging, peaceful but determined crowd that was growing by the minute, demanding entry and refusing to disperse. One of the most iconic and emotionally charged scenes unfolded at the Bornholmer Strage border crossing. Thousands of East Berliners, hearing the incredible news, began to converge on the checkpoint, their numbers swelling by the minute, their faces a mixture of hope and trepidation, demanding to be let through. The crowd grew denser, more insistent, and increasingly vocal, chanting, "Open the gate," and "We want out," with an unshakable determination. The officer in charge at Bornholmer Strage, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Geiger, found himself under immense, almost unbearable pressure. He had received no official directive from his superiors, who were themselves in frantic, confused meetings, desperately trying to understand Shabovsky's announcement and formulate a coherent response, but failing to provide any guidance, leaving him isolated and responsible for a potentially catastrophic situation. Geiger faced an impossible, terrifying dilemma. Either use lethal force against the surging, peaceful, yet increasingly agitated crowd, risking an unimaginable bloodbath and international condemnation, or open the gates without explicit orders, risking severe punishment, imprisonment, or even execution for insubordination. He made frantic phone calls to his superiors, but received no clear instructions, only evasions and contradictions, as the chain of command crumbled under the weight of the moment and the sheer human pressure, leaving him to make a solitary, momentous decision. The crowd continued to swell, their voices growing louder, their collective determination palpable and undeniable. Geiger, a man suddenly thrust into a pivotal moment of history, seeing that the situation was rapidly becoming unmanageable and fearing a stampede or a violent confrontation, made a unilateral, courageous decision. At approximately 10:45 p.m., against all standing orders and protocol, he ordered his guards to open the barrier at Orno-Restrage. It was a moment of immense personal courage, profound humanity, and an act that directly triggered the wall's collapse. A decision born of crisis and compassion that prioritized human lives over rigid regulations and set off a chain reaction. Across the city's border points, leading to a cascade of openings as other commanders, facing similar pressures and without clear orders, followed suit, unable to hold back the tide of history. The initial trickle of people passing through the gate quickly turned into an unstoppable flood. As the first East Berliners stepped into West Berlin, they were met by jubilant, tearful West Berliners, who had also rushed to the wall, drawn by the incredible news, some bringing flowers, others bottles of champagne, offering hugs and welcome money, sharing cigarettes and stories, creating spontaneous scenes of joy and camaraderie. The scenes that followed were utterly unimaginable just hours before. People embraced complete strangers. Tears of unadulterated joy streamed down faces on both sides, and spontaneous, ecstatic celebrations erupted along the entire length of the former divide. Cars honked their horns in a cacophony of celebration. People danced uncontrollably on top of the wall, and champagne corks popped in every direction. The atmosphere was electric, a dizzying mixture of disbelief, overwhelming euphoria, and profound collective relief, as decades of separation instantly dissolved into a shared moment of liberation and human connection, a truly historic night that transcended political boundaries and united a divided people, culminating in a joyous outpouring of emotion. Similar, equally joyous scenes unfolded simultaneously at other border crossings across Berlin and along the entire inner German border. Guards, facing similar overwhelming pressures and without clear, consistent orders from their paralyzed superiors, began to open more gates, one after another, as the human tide became irresistible. The wall, for decades an unyielding symbol of brutal division and oppression, was suddenly, miraculously permeable. People climbed onto the concrete barrier, chipping away at its formidable structure with hammers and chisels. These determined Mauerspect, or wall peckers, creating their own tangible souvenirs of this historic moment, a physical act of liberation and defiance, a symbolic dismantling of tyranny. The wall, once an impenetrable fortress, was now being systematically dismantled by ordinary citizens, piece by piece, brick by brick, under the gaze of a stunned world, a testament to the power of human will and the yearning for freedom. International reactions were an extraordinary mixture of shock, unbridled joy, and cautious optimism. Leaders around the world watched in utter astonishment as the incredible events unfolded live on television. U.S. President George H.W. Bush expressed his profound delight and amazement, calling it a great day for freedom and a victory for democracy. Though his administration initially favored a slower approach to German reunification to ensure stability and avoid alarming the Soviets. German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, who was on a crucial state visit to Poland, immediately cut short his trip to return to Germany, recognizing the monumental significance of the moment and the urgent need for leadership in the rapidly changing landscape, quickly formulating a 10-point plan for reunification to seize the historical opportunity. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher expressed caution, concerned about a unified Germany's potential power and its place in Europe, fearing a resurgence of German dominance and a shift in the balance of power, while French President Francois Mitterrand also harbored reservations, fearing a shift in the European balance of power and the weakening of the Soviet Union, which he thought could lead to instability. Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev, though surprised by the speed and spontaneity of the events, stated that the events were a natural outcome of his reforms, attempting to frame it as a controlled process, despite the clear loss of control and the unexpected acceleration of history. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not merely a German event. It was a global phenomenon, signaling the rapid, irreversible decline of Soviet power and the impending, definitive end of the Cold War, fundamentally reshaping international relations and the global order, ushering in a new geopolitical era of hope and uncertainty. It was a moment of profound hope, demonstrating the irresistible power of popular movements and the inherent fragility of even the most oppressive regimes when faced with the collective, unwavering will of a people yearning for fundamental freedom. The entire world witnessed history being made, live, on television, a powerful testament to the transformative power of information and the yearned, unstoppable human desire for liberty. The immediate aftermath of November 9, 1989, was a period of sustained euphoria and truly profound, rapid change. For days, even weeks, after the initial opening, the spontaneous celebrations continued unabated. East Berliners streamed into West Berlin in their hundreds of thousands, eager to experience the freedoms, the vibrant culture, and the abundance of consumer goods that had been denied to them for so long. They were greeted with open arms, often given welcome money by the West German government, and offered free public transport, a gesture of solidarity and generosity that cemented the bond between East and West, creating a powerful sense of shared identity and collective destiny. The streets of West Berlin were transformed into a continuous, joyous party, as people from both sides of the former divide mingled freely, shared emotional stories, and celebrated their newfound unity and freedom. The iconic Brandenburg Gate, once a stark and painful symbol of division, became a central focal point for these celebrations, with people dancing ecstatically on top of the wall, chipping away at its concrete, and embracing the dawn of a new, hopeful era, a truly unforgettable sight of collective jubilation and liberation, a moment of profound human connection and shared destiny. The physical dismantling of the wall began almost immediately, first by the enthusiastic Mauerspect with their rudimentary hammers and chisels, and then more systematically by official crews using heavy machinery, including bulldozers and cranes, to remove larger sections. Sections of the wall were carefully removed, paving the way for new roads, railway lines, and vital connections between East and West that had been severed. For decades, literally reconnecting the city's infrastructure and its people. While some sections were deliberately preserved as poignant memorials and historical sites, like the East Side Gallery, a long section of the wall covered in vibrant murals by international artists, standing as a testament to artistic freedom and hope, and the Berlin Wall Memorial on Bernauer Straße, which preserves a chilling section of the original death strip, complete with watchtowers and security fences, offering a deeply poignant and immersive insight into the lives affected by the division and the tragic fates of those who tried to escape. The vast majority of the wall was torn down, its concrete pieces often sold as cherished souvenirs around the world, a tangible reminder of a fallen tyranny and a piece of history in millions of homes. The removal of the wall was not just a physical act. It was a deeply symbolic act of reunification, erasing the most visible and painful scar of Germany's long and bitter division, allowing the city to breathe again and begin healing from decades of separation and trauma, both physically and emotionally. The fall of the wall quickly and dramatically accelerated the process of German reunification. While initially some, including Chancellor Kohl, envisioned a slower, more gradual process of convergence, perhaps a confederation or a looser association, the popular will for immediate and complete unity in East Germany was overwhelming and undeniable, expressed forcefully in the streets and at the ballot box. The first truly free and democratic elections in East Germany in March 1990 saw a landslide victory for political parties advocating for rapid, decisive reunification with West Germany, signaling the clear desire of the people for a swift end to their separate existence and a full embrace of democracy and market economy. Political negotiations between East and West Germany, and crucially, with the four Allied powers, the United States, the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and France, known as the 2+4 Treaty, moved at an unprecedented breakneck pace. Driven by the urgency of the moment and the desire to seize this historic opportunity for a peaceful transition. These complex negotiations meticulously addressed critical issues such as Germany's final borders, its military status, its continued place within NATO, and its full sovereignty, culminating in a historic agreement that paved the way for unification and resolved lingering post-war questions, marking the end of the post-war occupation regime and Germany's full return to the international community as a unified, sovereign state. On October 3, 1990, less than a year after the wall fell, Germany was officially and joyously reunified, becoming a single, sovereign, and democratic nation once more, a truly remarkable achievement that defied decades of Cold War division and seemed almost impossible just a year prior. The economic challenges of reunification were immense, far greater than initially anticipated. East Germany's centrally planned economy was in ruins, utterly unable to compete with the highly efficient, dynamic, and market-driven economy of West Germany. Many state-owned enterprises in the East, which had been artificially propped up by the communist system, were found to be inefficient, technologically backward, and utterly uncompetitive, leading to widespread factory closures and mass unemployment. On an unprecedented scale, particularly in the industrial sector, the Treuhandanstalt, a government agency tasked with privatizing or liquidating East German state-owned companies, faced an enormous and often controversial task, leading to job losses and social disruption, as many businesses simply couldn't survive in a competitive environment, causing profound economic shock and hardship. The integration of two vastly different economic systems, one capitalist and one communist, proved to be an incredibly difficult, complex, and costly process, requiring massive financial transfers from west to east to modernize infrastructure, restructure industries, and stimulate economic growth, often dubbed the Aufbauost, Reconstruction East. This led to some resentment in the West, as taxpayers bore the significant financial burden of reunification through a solidarity surcharge, Solidaritätszackel, and a sense of disillusionment and hardship in the East as the promised prosperity and immediate economic benefits did not materialize overnight, leading to a period of significant social upheaval and uncertainty, and a feeling of being second-class citizens for some, grappling with a new, unfamiliar system and the loss of their former identity and social safety nets. Beyond the formidable economic hurdles, there were significant psychological and social impacts that continue to resonate. For many East Germans, the sudden transition to a capitalist society was disorienting, challenging, and often traumatic. They faced unprecedented job insecurity, a completely different consumer culture with overwhelming choice, and a profound loss of familiar social structures and certainties, including established childcare, community networks, and a sense of collective purpose that had defined their lives under socialism. This led to a phenomenon known as nostalgia, a complex and nuanced nostalgic longing for certain aspects of life in the GDR, not necessarily for the political system itself, but for the perceived sense of community, job security, affordable housing, and simpler times, a feeling of belonging that was lost in the rapid transition to a more individualistic, competitive society. The integration of two distinct societies, shaped by decades of vastly different political systems, cultural values, and lived experiences, was a complex, ongoing process that continues to influence German society today. Differences in outlook, cultural nuances, and economic disparities between the former East and West persist, though they have gradually diminished over time. As generations grow up in a unified Germany, fostering a new shared identity that transcends the old divisions. The process of coming to terms with the Stasi past, with millions of surveillance files now accessible through the Gauck Commission, also presented a profound moral and social challenge, forcing individuals to confront betrayal, complicity, and the dark history of state repression within their own families and communities. A difficult but necessary reckoning for national healing and justice. The Berlin Wall's enduring symbolism is perhaps its most profound and lasting legacy. Its dramatic fall marked the definitive, undeniable end of the Cold War, signaling the irreversible collapse of Soviet communism and the triumphant, albeit messy, emergence of democratic ideals across Eastern Europe. It became a powerful universal testament to the fundamental idea that oppressive regimes, no matter how formidable, how well guarded, or how seemingly eternal, cannot forever suppress the innate human spirit's unyielding desire for freedom, self-determination, and dignity. The indelible images of ordinary people dancing on the wall, chipping away at its concrete with their bare hands, and embracing complete strangers from the other side, resonated globally as a powerful beacon of hope and an inspiring reminder of the transformative power of peaceful protest and collective action. It showed that change, even revolutionary change, can happen without widespread violence, a crucial lesson for future movements seeking liberation and justice around the world, proving that the will of the people can overcome even the most formidable barriers. The lessons learned from the Berlin Wall are numerous, multifaceted, and profoundly important for future generations. It demonstrated the inherent fragility of totalitarian power when confronted by the collective, unwavering will of a determined populace. It underscored the fundamental importance of universal human rights, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, and self-expression as essential components of a just society, proving that these are not mere luxuries, but necessities for human flourishing and progress. It taught the world, unequivocally, that walls, whether physical barriers or ideological divides, ultimately fail to contain the irrepressible yearning for liberty and human connection, and that the human spirit will always strive for freedom, no matter the cost or the obstacles. The wall stands today as a solemn historical warning against division, isolation, and the brutal suppression of human dignity. It reminds us of the inherent dangers of ideological extremism, the corrosive effects of state surveillance, and the paramount importance of open, democratic societies that respect individual freedoms and foster genuine dialogue and understanding across differences, building bridges rather than walls between people and nations, and striving for a more peaceful and interconnected world. Today, significant remnants of the Berlin Wall stand as powerful, poignant memorials, serving as open-air museums and educational sites that draw millions of visitors annually from across the globe. The East Side Gallery, a long section of the wall covered in vibrant murals by international artists, stands as a testament to artistic freedom and hope, a canvas of liberation and a symbol of a new era of expression and international solidarity, transforming a symbol of oppression into one of creativity and unity. The Berlin Wall Memorial on Bernauer Straße preserves a chilling section of the original death strip, complete with watchtowers and security fences, offering a deeply poignant and immersive insight into the lives affected by the division and the tragic fates of those who tried to escape, a place for quiet reflection and remembrance, ensuring the victims are not forgotten and their stories are told for posterity. The Checkpoint Charlie Museum continues to tell the stories of daring escapes and Cold War espionage, preserving the memory of individual courage and ingenuity against overwhelming odds, and highlighting the human drama of the division. These sites serve as crucial, living reminders of a dark and painful chapter in human history, ensuring that future generations understand the immense sacrifices made and the profound, transformative significance of that incredible night in November 1989. The fall of the Berlin Wall was not just a singular event. It was a complex, organic process, a culmination of decades of struggle, defiance, unwavering hope, and the sheer courage of ordinary people who refused to be silenced and yearned for a better life. It was a moment when the seemingly impossible became gloriously possible, when a concrete barrier that seemed eternal crumbled under the irresistible weight of human aspiration. It truly reshaped the world, ushering in a new era of global politics, and demonstrating unequivocally that the desire for freedom is an unstoppable universal force. Thank you for joining me on this extensive, detailed exploration of such a pivotal and inspiring moment in our shared history. I sincerely hope you found this journey through the past as compelling, insightful, and moving as I did.